This episode is brought to you by my very first book, The Fifth Vital Sign: Master Your Cycles and Optimize Your Fertility. With over 1,000 research citations, it is the most comprehensive resource on fertility awareness and the menstrual cycle to date. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/vitalsign for a free sample of the first chapter. That's fertilityfriday.com/vitalsign. This episode is brought to you by the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook, the first beautifully designed, fully customizable paper charting workbook designed with you in mind. With 3 years worth of charting pages, the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook has you covered. If you've been looking for a solid alternative to charting apps, you'll love this charting workbook. The Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook is available in both Fahrenheit and Celsius editions, and it's available in spiral-bound, paperback, and ebook versions. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/workbook to order your copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/workbook. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 311. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of 2 beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today. I'm excited to share today's episode with you. Today I'm sharing my conversation with Maisie Hill, the author of Period Power, and we dive into fertility awareness charting and the incredible role that it can play in our lives. And what I found to be really fun, just kind of like a fun fact when I was talking to Maisie, is that I realized we'd had similar experiences. We had both discovered fertility awareness at a relatively young age, and it had really shaped our understanding of health and our bodies and our cycles. And it's kind of like, and off we went to share this information with the world. And as someone who has been in this experience of cycling just naturally and tracking my cycle for the better part of 2 decades, it's just really fascinating to see how much of an impact it can make in your life. So regardless of when you discover charting and how long you've been charting, if you have the opportunity and the desire to tap into that, definitely follow that, because there's a lot of wisdom and guidance, I would even go so far as to say, that you can gain just from going with the ebbs and flows of your cycle, paying attention to your emotions and the physicality and all of these different aspects of your health, and understanding that your cycle is a vital sign, and that if something is out of whack, or if your emotions even are beyond what you feel they should be, those are all indications. And all of those signs and pieces of information are your body's way of communicating with you. So this is such an amazing opportunity for you to connect with yourself. So many of us feel disconnected. So with that said, let's jump into today's episode with Maisie. And I'm really excited to be here with Maisie Hill today. Maisie is a highly qualified and sought-after women's health expert with over a decade of experience as a practitioner and birth doula. Maisie knows the power of working with the menstrual cycle and believes that our hormones are there to serve us and help us get what we want out of life. What lights Maisie up is helping women to understand the inner workings of the reproductive system so that they can make sense of their menstrual cycle and use their hormones to great advantage in their lives. Her first book, Period Power, was published by Bloomsbury imprint Green Tree on May 2nd, 2019. So in today's episode, we are talking about Maisie's new book, Period Power, which is a great book. I've been privy to a copy and I've really enjoyed it. There's a lot of overlap. But in our pre-chat, we were calling ourselves blood sisters because we do such similar work. So with that, welcome to the show, Maisie.
Thank you, Lisa. I am so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and I just loved it when we were talking before and you were like, I feel like we're blood sisters. I was like, yeah, that's how I feel too, because when I was reading your book, I just love your book. I think sometimes when you're a practitioner and you know a lot of the content that is in other people's books, some of them really stand out to you when you read them because you feel yourself connecting with the stuff that you already know, and some new stuff as well. I have to say, you had stuff in there I hadn't come across. But I found myself reading your book connecting with my knowledge in a deeper way through your explanations. And I really congratulate you because it is an incredible book.
Well, thank you so much. And we were talking in the pre-chat as well. I mean, your book as well, I was reading through it and it's really refreshing because there's an explosion of discussion around period health and the menstrual cycle and of course interest in fertility awareness. But it's rare to find a book where someone is actually addressing those concepts in a way that is accurate as well as, you know what I mean? And that comes from your years and years of experience working in the field. So same to you. So we could sit here and compliment each other all day. But I really want to get into it. I think, well, what I typically ask most, if not all of my guests anyways, because of my own interest and curiosity as well, is could you share with us how you found yourself in this field? So you've been in the field for a long time. So share with us what prompted you to dive into the field and what inspired you then to put your knowledge into period power.
Such a great question. So I got really lucky, I have to say. I feel like I got lucky a lot because my mum, when I was doing my A-levels, so that's like the end of high school for anyone listening in North America. I used to live in New York, so I can equate things. And when I was doing my final exams, my mum was training in aromatherapy and reflexology and things. So at the same time I was studying biology, she was focusing on those therapies. And that like clued me into a more holistic way of doing things. And I also discovered Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom on her bookshelf and like devoured that as a 17-year-old. It's a pretty hefty book for a 17-year-old to read, and I loved it. And then when I was living in New York, I happened across the book Taking Charge of Your Fertility, which I'm sure all your listeners are familiar with. And I read that and I was just astonished at what was going on inside my body. And I was curious, fascinated, amazed, and also really angry that I was 22 and only coming across that knowledge then, when actually I needed it when I was 14. And it really stayed with me, and I'd recently come off the pill. I started charting my cycle in order as a method of contraception, and it's been my main method of contraception other than using condoms since then. So that's like, I'm about to turn 39. So I've been using it a long time and it's worked perfectly for me. I've had 2 planned pregnancies, no unplanned pregnancies. And so those books really got me dialed into women's health, and at the same time I started working as a birth doula, started training in therapies myself, always with the view of I want to focus on the menstrual cycle and on fertility and pregnancy and perimenopause. That was always what I wanted to do. And I just got really lucky because I read those books. I started coming across great practitioners. So I trained with Nicole Jardim and Jessica Drummond, and then I went on to do this amazing apprenticeship with Alexandra Pope and Shani Hugo Wurlitzer, who I know you've had on the show, and they're incredible women. And their apprenticeship through Red School, that was like the final piece of the puzzle for me, because how they explain the cycle according to the 4 seasons of the cycle just gave me this framework for putting my knowledge of Chinese medicine, of hormones, of like day-to-day tips for living. It kind of all came together. And I have to say, it was actually having my son and being up breastfeeding him night after night that really like drove me to finally write the book, because something happened when I was up at 2 o'clock every night breastfeeding him, and just things started to sift into place for me. And I thought, I've just got to write a book and get this out there.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's an incredible story. There's so many pieces of it. I think there's just aspects of your journey. I think that's why your book resonates with me, because there's a difference between reading something today and then becoming interested versus having read it at such a young age. Women's Body, Women's Wisdom. And when I was in university, Our Bodies, Ourselves, I went through this whole, I call it my post-high school feminist phase. And I went, just like went to town on the books and reading and learning. And I mean, a huge part of it obviously was the menstrual cycle. And it's interesting because if you get to a place where the menstrual cycle is kind of central in your understanding, then all the other aspects of feminism, women's reproductive rights, birth control, and even body image, how you look at your period, whether it's positive or negative, how you look at just all of these things, I feel like a lot of it kind of stems from there. And so I feel like that's when you talk about your experience, I feel like that's what, because from your perspective, having charted your cycles for so long and relied on it for birth control, you have a different knowledge of charting that you can only gain from doing it and using it for however many years that is. So yes, you have answered the question. Like, now I know.
And I have to say, it was also what kind of also got me really dialed into this is my own experience of having absolutely horrific period pain, and for years I really slogged it out with horrific pain. And it was my journey to heal that pain and trying all sorts of therapies and working on different aspects of my life and getting incredible results and having really incredible periods now, not painful in the slightest. It was also that really made me want to focus on this.
Well, let's talk about that.
Okay. Let's go there.
Because being in this world and this field and being very outspoken about hormonal birth control and things like that, I get a lot of pushback, especially from women who have horrible periods that are excruciatingly painful. And what I found is that when I say things publicly, like the pill doesn't fix or cure anything, there's always a percentage of women that jump on that and are like, this woman is crazy. Who is she anyways? The pill is the only thing that ever helped my periods. I had horrible periods for years, and if it wasn't for the pill, I wouldn't be able to go to work. And so I hear that because I was you. I too had horror, like it was so bad. And I've said it on the podcast a number of times. So it felt like someone reached into my ass. I just swore, even though I told you that. So I'm going to be. But it felt like someone reached up into my butt and squeezed as hard as they could. That was like one version of the pain. But I say that because it's necessary. People don't understand how painful it can be unless they've experienced it themselves. So share with us just a little bit more about your journey. Like, what was your pain like? If you could describe it for us, you could describe it on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being nothing, 10 being someone stabbing you in the abdomen. And how did you manage, like, how were you managing it before you came into this knowledge of a different way?
Oh man, there's so many different layers to this. I'm going to attempt to keep it brief for you. But I had cramps from the beginning. From my first period, I had cramps. And in my mid-teens, I went on the birth control pill, partly as a method of contraception, partly feeling like it was the responsible thing to do, and also because I had this pain and I just wanted to get rid of it. And it did get rid of it. It didn't treat it, but it got rid of it. But it also it numbed the pain, but it also numbed me. And, I had a lot of issues whilst I was on the pill in terms of my mental health. And absolutely no sexual desire of any kind. And that had a huge influence on how I thought of myself, and, you know, really thinking that I was abnormal for not feeling desire and for not feeling better living my life. So I came off the pill, and that meant immediately I had to deal with the pain. And I dealt with that by just chucking painkillers down my throat. And they worked sometimes, a little bit, but they really just took the edge off. I would not be able to work. I would be in bed with numerous hot water bottles on my abdomen and on my back. I would be writhing around, grabbing at pillows, jumping into scorching hot baths. And I remember 3 months in a row, I gave myself blisters. I have a photo, I should send it to you. Gave myself blisters on my abdomen because the hot water bottle was so hot, but because I was in so much pain, I couldn't recognize that there was this other pain going on from the hot water bottle. So horrific. Like, I would just, if I came on when I was out and about, I remember being in Brooklyn once at the farmers market in Park Slope and trying to get home, and I just couldn't get home, and I just had to lie down on the sidewalk. And, you know, people just looking at me like I was a junkie or something, and no one offering help. My frankly quite useless boyfriend at the time not being able to get me home either. And, you know, and it was a mess all around. And I tried all sorts of different therapies and things, and some of them worked well, some of them worked better than others. And really what I realized is that when you have something going on like that, yes, sometimes there's a magic bullet and you figure out what that is and it changes it, but often treating menstrual cycle issues requires a multifaceted approach. And yes, you can do something like acupuncture, which worked brilliantly for me, and Arvigo techniques of Mayan abdominal therapy, which is an abdominal massage primarily. They work brilliantly, but I also had to look at nutrition, and I had to look at my lifestyle. And I did a couple of years of therapy, because I remember someone saying to me, Maisie, you know what, it's like your uterus is an angry fist saying F you to the world. And I was like, that is exactly what it's like. So there was a number of things that I had to do. And I think that is what really helps me as a practitioner now, is understanding that different things work for different people at different times in their life. And yeah, treatments can really improve things, but everything else has to be looked at as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I just need to like let that sit for a second. Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's like if anyone's listening and like you didn't know how bad period pain can be, like now you know. I can relate. It's horrible. But see, this is the thing. So I get it when women will say the pill's the only option, because their doctors are often telling them that that's the only option. At least the doctors aren't offering like hysterectomies, right? I say that as a joke, but it's not funny, because that's what is recommended, and you know what, or less so these days, right? But I suppose part of your story is that, you know, if you could have experienced pain that was so bad, the pill didn't actually do anything to deal with the underlying reason why you had pain. So the only way that you can understand that the pill doesn't cure, fix, or, you know, heal anything is by understanding first and foremost that periods should not be painful.
Yeah. Yeah.
A novel concept. So if you can first get that periods shouldn't be painful, and a healthy female body that is menstruating shouldn't have that level of pain, and that is an indication of a problem, only then can you recognize, well, oh wait, so if it's not supposed to be painful, then it means that there's something I have to correct in order to get rid of that pain.
Yeah, completely. And I really appreciate you for making that point, because this is the thing. We are really socialized into believing and accepting that period pain is part and parcel of having a menstrual cycle. And yeah, period pain and pain at different, you know, other points in the cycle is common. That does not make it normal.
Yeah. And the other thing is, even if the pain is horrifying, if your doctor's saying that that's the only option, then keep your doctor. We all need doctors, but you what I would hope that you would take from Maisie's story is that it is possible. It's not necessarily easy. It's never easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's not the same as taking an Advil. When you're addressing period pain from the root, you have to make a bunch of changes over a period of time.
Yeah.
But once you get on that and you get the support that you need to really address what's the underlying issues through potentially a variety of different modalities, depending on what works with you, but it's not like one thing. You can't expect to go to acupuncture and do nothing else and have your periods magically just fixed forever.
Yeah.
But once you sort that out, you can experience a life of minimal to no pain.
Yeah.
Like once you've kind of gone through the hell of figuring it out and having to deal with, one cycle's a little bit better, one cycle's horrible. Once you figure this out over a period of time, you can get to the point where there's no pain. So
yeah.
yeah.
And this is I think it's really, I imagine that there are people who are suffering with pain in their cycle, listening to this, thinking, but this isn't possible for me. Like,
Exactly.
yeah, I heard that extreme story, but I still don't think it's possible for me. And I was working with a client recently, well, I still am, who has adenomyosis and has lots of other issues going on. And like, I've been on the verge of having to call an ambulance and begging for morphine. Like I've had the phone in my hand thinking, am I going to do this? She has done that. She's been hospitalized regularly every time she has her period in the ambulance on morphine. And I've been working with her, and the transformation she's undergone in the several months that we've been working together is incredible. And now, like, she can go out for a gentle walk when she has her period instead of being bedridden or in the hospital. And that is partly something to do with the treatments that we've been doing, but it's also largely to do with all the other strategies that she has brought in. And I really do think if that change is possible for her, that it is possible. And it's hard when you're in that place and you're maybe on some level consciously or subconsciously believing that your body is dysfunctional and it isn't capable of something. It's hard to sum up that belief that something can be different for you. And that's where getting support from someone from somewhere is important, because they can help you to move towards like taking the steps that are necessary.
Well, and I remember when I was in my late teens, early 20s, and did similar to what you did, went off the pill because I didn't want to be on it, and I still had to deal with the pain. And so it was a combination of ibuprofen and failed attempts at all different types of things for a few years there. And there's a lot of resources out there that make it seem real simple, like just take cramp bark, or just do this, or it's in your mind because you have unresolved sadness. So just think of nice things. And then, so there's a lot of garbage stuff out there that doesn't work. And so any woman who's like, I feels like I've tried everything and nothing works. This is so similar to what you're saying when you're working with a practitioner who understands the underlying factors and reasons why you have period pain, which is largely related to inflammation, among a number of other specific issues. When you work with someone who can help you devise a plan to systematically address those things through a variety of different approaches over a period of time, and who's willing to work with you over that time. If you're in your doctor's office and they're telling you it's not possible, again, you need your doctor, so keep your doctor, but continue looking for a practitioner until you find someone that truly understands and who has specifically worked with women who have period pain and who they've supported to improve that. So I think it's just really important. So I appreciate for you for kind of hanging out here with me, because this is the message, right? The message is that it is possible. It's not BS, but it's different than what you would think. It's different than Western medicine, because often it starts with what are you eating and what are you exposing yourself to and what nutrients are you deficient in? And it goes from there.
Yeah. There's so many layers to it, and it's often, like the layers of an onion. You have to like peel each one away and work at it. But those effects are cumulative, and they all play a part in it. And it's also, when we're working with menstrual cycle issues and fertility issues, it is a kind of long-term game. And sometimes there are quick, easy wins that make a difference very, very early on. But often, like, we're looking at working over the course of several, if not many, menstrual cycles in order to get the effects we want. So I think that's also important to be aware of. But it's a really worthwhile investment, because when we're thinking about the menstrual cycle and we're thinking about fertility, I get really emotional thinking about it, because we're thinking about the health of women through our reproductive years, through any pregnancies we might have, through any postpartums that we have, through perimenopause, menopause, and on into our, post-reproductive years. And so the work that we're doing, when we're in our teens, our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, it's going on for decades. It's far-reaching. So I really am a big believer in making that investment, whether it's an investment of your time, a self-care practice that you're doing. I say even just tracking your cycle, like tracking your cycle is an intervention that makes a difference. If you can do nothing else, track your cycle. Have conversations with friends, have conversations with your family, explain things to your kids. Like, it's far reaching. It's what's happening to us in our lives, but it's also our legacy and the stories we're leaving behind for the future generations about what is possible for our bodies, and the wisdom to treat the issues that we see very commonly.
Mm-hmm. Well, and of course, there's nothing wrong with using alternative therapies. Like, there's nothing wrong with using the pill to manage your period pain, and there's nothing wrong with chomping down the ibuprofen, because no one should be in pain, especially that type of pain. I just think it's important to, we can't be at this like lowest denominator, like this complete garbage expectation of women's health that we think in any way, shape, or form that's good enough. So we can certainly use those tools to help us while we're on our journey to figure out how to handle it. That's what I did. I didn't know, like, it was like I did what my knowledge allowed me to. So my knowledge was to the point of, okay, I need to be on the pill. So I took the pill. When I expanded my knowledge from there, I got off the pill, started the painkillers. But I continued to expand my knowledge until I got to the point that I didn't need those anymore. But there was nothing wrong with using them. So I feel like, if anything, it's like we have to actually value women enough in our culture to believe that it is not good enough for us to be in such severe pain that we need to be medicated all the time. I mean, can we just agree on that? Like, is that so much? How is this like a revolutionary thought that we deserve to not be in such severe pain that we require constant medication? And if we require constant medication, that must mean that there's something that we could potentially be working on to why would anyone expect that is sufficient for us to live our entire lives medicated because of...
And I love that analogy that you use in the book. Like, if there's a fire going on in the house and the fire alarm's going off, you have to take action. You don't just put headphones on and try to ignore it. And but it's like, I get it. I've used the pill as a coping mechanism. My clients often do. And, sometimes it is a necessary buffer so that you can recoup your energy potentially. Say if you have a very heavy menstrual flow, then reducing that blood flow if you're struggling to find other ways, or you need to do something that reduces your flow or it reduces your pain whilst you are getting trustworthy information to make other decisions, either to do alongside using hormonal based contraception or not using it. You can treat that as okay, I'm going to use that for now because that's what I need to do. But whilst I'm taking it, I'm going to find out if there's something else that might work better for me, or are there things that I can put in place now so that I can transition off the pill and have a better experience. And sometimes it's really straightforward. It's like, often I have clients who are like have really, really heavy flow and they're taking paracetamol for pain relief. And I'll say, well, okay, so one immediate strategy is you could switch that out for ibuprofen and, you know, have pain relief that also may well reduce your flow at the same time. And so it's like medication has its place, but, you know, sometimes it's about making a more informed choice to support whatever your needs are.
See, this is why we're blood sisters. Okay, so I want to switch it up a little bit because, of course, this is really important, and I'm glad we had this conversation. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to ask you, and I'm not sure if it ties into the period pain conversation, but because you've been kind of in this space for a while, I wanted to ask you about certain trends, because I know that, for instance, when I started my training, when I first did training in fertility awareness in my early 20s, I learned the method let me try to explain. When you learn to teach fertility awareness, for example, or you read Taking Charge of Your Fertility, you're presented with a menstrual cycle that falls into these really normal parameters. And back in the day, when the fertility awareness educators of like the 70s and the 80s were developing and teaching and doing their work, the landscape was a lot different. Every single woman hadn't been on the pill for 20 years. So in my practice today, not all of my clients, but it's actually rare. So every now and then I'll do a group program, and one of the women in the program will have never taken birth control. And I'm always like, wow, they still make women like you. So because it's so rare. So I can honestly say that my practice today and the average woman that I'm seeing is very different to what the average fertility awareness educator was seeing in the 80s and the 90s and even the early 2000s. So I'm curious to just hear your thoughts on how the landscape has changed and what that means for practitioners. Because even for classically trained fertility awareness educators, there are very specific situations that I see all the time that your standard training does not teach you how to handle.
Yeah. Okay. Great question. So my perspective may be a bit different. So I just want to clarify that I'm not trained as a fertility awareness practitioner. I've used it personally for great success. And I look at BBT charts specifically as a Chinese medicine practitioner because they tell us a lot of great information. And of course, they can sometimes flag up conditions like hypothyroidism or just cycles that ovulation isn't taking place in. But I think the biggest change, and this is quite a selfish perspective, is that everyone's using apps instead of paper. And this I find challenging because often the apps are creating the rules and identifying when someone's fertile or when they may have ovulated. And I think that, you know, there's a disconnect there with, for me, one of the huge benefits to tracking your cycle is understanding it and being able to figure those things out. And particularly for me, when it's being used as a method of contraception, I have concerns about anyone just using an app.
Well, let's talk about that. So this is really interesting because when you then started charting, I'm going to just say this and you correct me if I'm wrong. There were no apps when you started charting?
No, okay.
I
think I had like an old Nokia phone, and my method of charting was taking charge of your fertility to a local shop and paying to photocopy the sheets inside of it.
Yeah, see, for me, I created like a spreadsheet version of the Taking Charge of Your Fertility chart, and then I ran it off and I made books and I, bound them and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so this is like a different era. So on the one hand, I do feel old in a way, but on the other hand, I feel very thankful for the experience of learning to chart on paper. Not because you have to chart on paper, but because if you actually chart on paper, even just for a period of time, so even if you charted on paper for, say, 6 to 12 cycles, and you'll notice I didn't say months, then you would have the opportunity really, really, really to get and understand how to identify when ovulation happened, how to just start paying attention to your own body signs. Because so tell us then about how you find, so for the women who are learning to chart on apps that offer predictions and fill in information, how have you found their understanding of fertility awareness to be different to yours?
Oh, well, it's hard because, of course, I'm a practitioner. So I'm coming from things from a very different place to someone who's like just coming to it as a method that they use in their personal life. So I have to appreciate that. But I find that women who are using apps don't understand the method. In very basically, they don't understand the guiding principles, the rules. If you took the app away, most of them, at least the clients that I see, I don't think would be able to identify when their fertile window is.
I just wanted to pop in to today's episode with a quick message from today's sponsor, Audible. Did you know that you can listen to The Fifth Vital Sign for free when you sign up for a 30-day trial with Audible? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/audible for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/audible. Now let's jump back into today's episode. So you can hear, I can hear the army of like, I use apps all the time. So I kind of make this up because I've been doing the podcast for so long. So I actually feel like I'm like the whisperer or whatever. So and I've heard people say like, you ask questions right when the question pops up in my mind. Like, how do you do that? So for the listeners who are like, yeah, whatever, Maisie, I use apps and I know what I'm talking about. I feel like it's helpful to just point out that there's nothing wrong with using apps, and there's nothing wrong with using an app that has those predictors, because people are using it and it's fine. And I had a really interesting conversation with Holly Griggs-Ball about Daisy, or Lady Comp back then. I don't hear a lot of talk about Lady Comp anymore, but because I was very like, I don't know about this app thing. And she was like, well, let's have a conversation about it because I feel like there's some positives that we need to talk about. And so that conversation was really helpful because she described it as, for many women, it's like the gateway drug of fertility awareness. So these apps are what first invite women into this conversation, women who would otherwise have never really even dipped a toe. Yeah. So, for the listeners who are like, what's she talking about? I know how to identify. Like, obviously there are women who use apps who do have an understanding, who have taken the time to read and to chart and potentially turn off the prediction settings and identify their own ovulation. So just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I use apps. There's certain elements of some apps that I find useful. Believe it or not, I'm not all analog.
You're not like 100% anti-app.
Yeah, but and I often find that a combination approach works really well. I am really interested in the Read Your Body app that's going to be coming out. I don't know if you've come across it. So that's symptothermal based app, but it's where the user identifies things rather than the app doing it. So I'm excited for that. But I think, for sure, there are a lot of people out there using fertility awareness who have a very good understanding of things, but apps are their preference. That's I have no issue with that. But in my practice with the women that I work with, and I'm not putting them down at all, but apps are convenient, and yes, they can be the gateway drug. I think that's such a great way of framing it. But I think they can, a lot of my clients have trouble identifying things, even with the app, guessing things. And I'll take a look at it and think, I'm not so sure that is when your fertile window is exactly according to the app. But as I said, I'm selfish, and my preference, my eyes, the way I read cycles, probably because that's how I got started. I read them better when I look at them on pen and paper. And maybe it's also because I probably look at women's like at 10 different apps across the space of a week. And so they all look different, and it can be hard especially when I'm looking at things from the Chinese medicine point of view, it's harder to get a gauge of what the range of temperatures look like from what I'm looking for as to like clues and ways of understanding someone's symptoms.
Well, I can appreciate that. I mean, for me, where I sit as a practitioner, because I teach the method. So when women come to me with their charts, so I'll read through and look at their charts and kind of go through and meet them exactly where they're at with all that information. But when I have a woman enter one of my programs, then we basically start charting in a more structured way, because once you get the different aspects in a more specific way, then the chart in itself is a bit more meaningful.
Yes.
So when you're taking your temperature correctly, I sometimes hesitate to use the word correctly, but there's a difference, right? So I've talked about it on the podcast before. So it's like the simplest thing, like leave the thermometer in for 10 minutes. But a lot of women are like, that's, silly. How could that make a difference? But in my perspective, when I have my clients on board with taking the temperature, just doing the correct stuff, all the different things we talk about, then the actual meaning of the chart is different. And when they compare the previous charts to the charts that we've done together, the temperatures make more sense because there's less fluctuation, things like that. So I could see, but I don't know if I would go so far to say like, you don't know what you're doing, but there's a refinement that happens when you're working with somebody who is able to provide you with that instruction. So I didn't have the experience of learning to do it on my own, like getting an app and like go having at her. When I learned for my own self, I learned from women who were trained in fertility awareness. So all of those little nuances from the very beginning, I was able to correct and align so that my charts made a lot of sense. And I was charting on paper as you were. So I was able to understand what I was looking at.
Yeah. And it's great because I think that word refinement really sums that up perfectly, I think. And don't get me wrong, like I started charting when I was 22. I haven't kept all my charts. Like I was just, I don't know what happened to them. I wish I had an app where I could go back and look at 15 years ago and see what was going on then. So yeah, for sure, apps 100% have their place. And it's all about, with cycle tracking in all its forms, whether it's BBT or tracking mood and energy, you just got to do what works for you in the context of your life. And what works for you is the way to go.
Well, and have you seen, so the apps is a huge trend and it's really interesting. And it's also, there's an I think that there's a really exciting aspect of the apps, the fact that it is going mainstream. And yeah, the educators like myself are like, oh, we're kind of groaning because it's not as refined as we want it to be. But at the same time, it's still really exciting to see how it's going into the mainstream. So I'm curious if there are any other changes that you've seen just be based on the current time, or we could even touch on the changes in the way the media covers periods and things. It's really weird in a way. It's wonderful and weird to see how periods are just everywhere and how social media is filled with images of like bloody pads. I grew up in the era of blue liquid on, you know what I mean? Like it's very different now.
It is very different. And I actually had a journalist ask me recently, well, don't you think it's getting a bit too much? Like there's, because there's been like, so much discussion, especially in the UK here. There's been a lot of books, including my own, that have come out this year that have been specific to periods. And so because that's created more discussion in the media, and I think just generally that's been happening for the last like 5 years or so anyway, there has been this big increase. But a journalist was like, well, do you think we're putting too much emphasis on it? Is it getting too much? And I was like, well, what's too much? Because like having like a regular menstrual cycle is so essential and beneficial to our short-term and long-term health, and no one else is obsessing about them. So why would we not obsess about them and consider them? And I think this continual positioning as women as other, like we're the ones who are different because we aren't men. If it was the wrong way around, as so many wise women have been saying for decades, it would be a very different conversation.
Yeah, yeah, we're not little men. We're not men without penises, right? Like, and
Yeah.
breasts. And it's not like our ovaries are just, the analogy I always use is like, we're not cars. Like if I buy a car, I can take the air conditioning, or I can like not have the air conditioning and the car still works. Like my ovaries are not AC. So if I shut them on and off, it's not like I can just like work like perfectly. If you shut off half of my endocrine system, then obviously it's going to affect more than just my ability to have children. And until we get our heads around the fact that the ovaries make the estrogen and progesterone, and we have receptors for those hormones everywhere, including our brains and our bones and our breasts and all the different parts of our, until we actually start to understand that it's just a part of the biological female body that is important for optimal health, then it's going to be real hard to have meaningful conversations and to understand why it's important.
100%. I'm literally on the verge of high-fiving my screen.
Yes, let's do it. Let's do it. All right, awesome. You didn't see that, but we totally just high-fived. So one last topic as we bring our interview to a close that I just really feel to throw in, because one of the, and we talked about this briefly in the pre-chat, but one of the trends that I think that there's a part of me that is just so like, I can barely believe that this is a real thing. So there's a part of me that's in denial that it's a real thing, is the way that our culture is policing vulvas and how they look. And I think so I follow the Vulva Gallery
Oh, yeah.
on Instagram. And I love it. It's, I'm not well versed, so I can't say I know everything about the Vulva Gallery. But the woman behind it, she recently released a book, and I think it's called like the Book of Vulva Diversity. I'm not getting it right, I don't think, but something to that effect, the Book of Vulva Diversity or something like that. And she's obviously an artist, and women send it pictures of their vulvas, and so I haven't seen, it's not spread eagle. It's kind of like you're standing in front of a mirror or something, and then it would be what you see. So if you were to take off your underwear and just stand in front of a mirror, then that's what you would see. So and this is so, maybe I'm sharing my ignorance, but I'm just going to say it and then we can discuss. But I didn't realize it was a thing that so many women were ashamed of their labia because they feel that their labia is either too long or too short, or if the labia are not even. So if one labia is longer than the other, I didn't realize that that was such a huge problem, apparently, for so many women. So let's get into it, because in your book, you briefly touch on that and talk about how the porn industry has changed what we think a vulva should look like. Because apparently we're all supposed to have baby vulvas and all look like babies, which is
very tight,
creepy on 1,000 levels.
Yeah, nice and tight and perfectly symmetrical and bald and all nipped
Hairless.
and tucked. And I say nipped and tucked because that is actually where things are heading, because there's an increasing amount of women and girls, and I really do mean girls, like prepubescent girls, I'm starting to undergo changes, and even going so far as seeking out, I use the term corrective surgery, but it is not corrective. There's nothing there to correct. Like, you are not abnormal if like one of your labia is slightly lower than the other. Like, of course it would be.
Elective plastic surgery, or we could make up all the terms.
Yeah. But it's like, we don't see that in nature. You wouldn't look, I don't know, like flowers are often used as imagery for vulvas, but when you look at rose petals as they unfold, they're not perfectly symmetrical. Some are bigger than others, and our labia are a sequence of folds that are unique to us, and that's a process that starts off in utero very, very early on in pregnancy. And why it breaks my heart that there are people in the world, male and female, who think that vulvas should be symmetrical and hairless, and that is so much of through exposure to pornography, whether it's like photographs that have been airbrushed and made to look different, or whether it's porn actresses who have had surgery, who do shave. It does change things. And I actually heard this amazing story. I wish I could reference it properly, but I think it was a Dutch sex educator was, I think it was on a British TV show actually. And she was giving a group of British school children, so high school age, a sex education lesson. And she put up photos of different vulvas on a big board, and of course they had hair and things, and the male pupils were like, oh, there's hair, like thoroughly disgusted. And I think that's actually a really common reaction now. And she gave them all razors and instructed them to all go home and shave off their pubic hair. And then like she met with them a couple of days later, and they were all like really, really itchy and finding it sore. And I just thought that was a really great way of bringing in like, well, this is what your expectation is of female bodies, that we preen ourselves somehow and go to such extreme lengths as to have, well, even just consider surgery, let alone actually having it. But this is like the state of play at the moment. I find it, yeah, heartbreaking, worrying, and it angers me. It really angers me.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things wrong with with this idea. There's part of me though that wonders if, so for instance, men, now it's not like I run around seeing penises all the time. So, but I feel like men grow up in a culture where they end up seeing more penises.
Yeah,
when I was growing up, I didn't see anyone's vulva. Like I didn't see anyone's vulva. And it wasn't until maybe I was reading something or watching something and someone said something about like, have you looked at your vulva, that I actually went home and did it. Cause I had never, and I actually, it could have been, I think I've mentioned this, but also when I was learning in my junior high sex ed class, and even in like books and things, there was not a picture of a vulva that was like what an actual vulva looks like. When you look at penises in books, it actually looks like what a penis looks like. So the general anatomy is what it really looks like. But when you're looking at images of the vulva, even in certain medical textbooks, it doesn't show labia. It doesn't actually show what an actual human woman's vulva looks like. So I remember going to school and the clitoris was a dot. And I remember coming home and actually like looking at my vulva with a mirror and actually thinking there was something wrong because I didn't have the dot, right? Because I had this clitoral hood and it was bigger than the dot, and I had never seen anything like that. So in many ways, the reason, that I even bring up the Vulva Gallery and her book, The Book of Vulva Diversity, is because, so if you think your labia are too big or whatever, then that would be a good thing to follow, because it actually shows you what women's vulvas look like and how some women do have vulva that hang a little bit longer. And it's just that's just what the human vulva looks like. So yeah, it's like a long thought, but I think that a big problem is that we're not seeing vulvas ever. We don't see what real women's vulvas look like with hair, with all the different shapes and sizes, and what actual labia look like. Because if you saw what actual labia look like on 100 different women, then you would realize that your labia is completely fine.
Yeah. And what a wonderful gift that would be, to grow up knowing, hey, there's nothing wrong with you. You have a beautiful vulva.
Yeah. I don't know what the solution is, but.
Well, I think that it's interesting you bring up like the medical textbook, because like some of them still don't feature the clitoris, or they don't feature the extent of it. They just still portray it as a little nub or a dot, and they don't include the internal anatomy. As we now know, the clitoris is far bigger than the external part of it. But it's also thinking about how the internal reproductive anatomy is represented as well, because it's like this very fixed idea that your uterus is bang in the middle, and there's these massive fallopian tubes that go out to the side, and your ovaries are hanging neatly beneath them. Actually, your fallopian tubes kind of go further backwards rather than going straight out towards the side. So your ovaries are kind of positioned slightly behind you, not behind you, like to your posterior. And, one part of the internal diameter of the fallopian tube is as narrow as a human hair. The rest of it's quite muscular, like the other layers of it, but that internal layer, and when you think about that journey that the egg has to go down, and those hairs that line the insides of the fallopian tubes, and how our fallopian tubes slow down that egg's journey for very good reasons, as were the potential for conceiving is going on. I'm just amazed by the body. And this is what I think is really important, like talking about how incredible the female anatomy is, because so often it's talked about like it's this part of us that doesn't work that well, and like, oh, it doesn't contract very efficiently in labor compared to other animal species, and it causes us pain and suffering, and we bleed heavily or infertile, and we have an incompetent cervix, and it's like failure to progress in labor. We're always talking about female anatomy in really degrading terms that I think actually are not helpful at all when we're trying to have a positive image of ourselves. So, talking about how amazing our bodies are, and the incredible feats that we achieve throughout our lifetime and in each menstrual cycle, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a question for you. So, I mean, I'll just throw it your way and let you take it how you will.
Okay.
But how do you think then that learning about the menstrual cycle and early on, and learning about periods, and learning about the role of just our reproductive anatomy and ovulation and all of those things, how do you think that learning about those things could impact a woman's self-concept and just thoughts of her own body and her own vulva and her own, just even her own femininity?
Such a great question to end on. And I got like my heart fluttered and I got goosebumps as you asked that, because it does have such a huge impact, especially at that point in adolescence where our bodies are changing and we're starting to work towards ovulation and having a menstrual cycle. And that is a time when a lot is in flux in terms of the internal environment of our body, but also the external environment and people's responses to us. And, just how, like, thinking, how was the knowledge that you had started menstruating greeted? Like, how did you greet that knowledge? How did people around you respond? What did that mean for your relationships and family dynamics? And Jane Bennett has an incredible book, and she talks about this quite a lot, but it has huge impact in terms of how we view ourselves and our fertility, our reproductive capacity, our mental health. Like, it impacts us on every single level, and it always will. And so it's really powerful to bring this in from an early age. And I'm talking like pre-teens, like going way back. And I don't mean just talking to our daughters, I mean talking to our sons as well. Like my cycle, I got my menstrual cycle back when my son was about 18 months old. And I was so excited to get it back. Like, I found pregnancy, I had an amazing pregnancy, an amazing birth, great postpartum. What I found challenging was not having a menstrual cycle because I got so used to living in tune with my cycle and having that rhythm that it was hard to not have it. And I knew that I needed to be in that space that's different. But when it came back, I was so thankful to be bleeding, just so thankful. And the first thing I did was I told my boyfriend, who was like so pumped for me, like gave me a massive hug and was like, I know how important this is to you. This is great. And then I told my son and I showed him the blood and I let him know, and I didn't make it a big deal, and it doesn't have to be a big deal. You can bring it in, and people listening to this, you've got to do what suits your family and your kids best. But I think we don't trust kids enough with that information. And a lot of that is to do with what we have internalized from our own experience. But saying it in a way that's not a big deal, like, oh, and even in a positive way, like, oh, I started bleeding today, check this out. And now, like, if we have a bath together, like, he actually, I don't know, it's like he thinks I've got some magic power. And let's face it, it can be like a magic power. But he wants me to, like, turn the whole bath red. He'll just be like, is there any more in there? Can you turn the whole bath red? And I just think is really powerful to be having these conversations from an early age and talking about the impact of them and changing the stories that are being passed down through generations into ones that are positive and that normalize the menstrual cycle and that celebrate it for how incredible it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, after all, every single person on earth is here because of their mother's menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
So it's kind of important. Just putting it out there.
Yeah.
Well, Maisie, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We could have continued chatting for the rest of the afternoon.
Oh my gosh, totally.
No, this was great. It was so nice to share stories and to learn from you and to just kind of be immersed in period positivity. I'm sure that there are a lot of women who listened to this episode today that really needed it. So thank you for that. Where can the listeners go to learn more about you and what you do and grab a copy of Period Power?
So maisiehill.com is my website, and I'm on Instagram. That's where you can usually find me. My handle is _Maisie Hill. And my online membership is probably, the doors will be closed to it by the time, assuming I get it up and running on time. I'm working on it at the moment. But the doors to that are going to be opening at the end of October. So probably by the time this episode goes out, the doors will be closed again. But it will be opening up again in 2020 at some point. So you can keep an eye on that. And my book, Period Power, I think the official line is that it's available in all good bookshops.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. We'll make sure to link to everything that you mentioned. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Lisa. I've been so excited to have this conversation with you, and I hope we get to do it again.
Yes. Thanks again. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/311. I hope that you enjoyed my interview with Maisie. I mean, what a powerful and important conversation for everyone listening. I mean, imagine if we had heard this conversation when we were all 13 years old. I mean, these are the types of conversations that we should be having as we come into this womanhood, as we're welcomed into this incredible time in our lives when we have this capacity to create life and are kind of holding that as well within a culture that doesn't celebrate that. And imagine if we did, imagine if we did celebrate that instead of scaring young women to death about this thought of an unplanned pregnancy and how horrible that could be, and focusing on this really negative view of our body's amazing ability to create. Imagine if instead we focused on truly deepening into that and understanding what it means, and understanding that it's nothing to fear, that we can understand and work with our bodies and achieve whatever it is that we want. It's completely and fully possible to successfully prevent pregnancy without hormones throughout your life. And also, every single young woman at the age of 12 and 13 isn't in a sexual relationship. And so it shouldn't be the only way that we talk about the menstrual cycle. I feel like so many different things, topics, concepts came out in today's conversation. And one of the things that I think is so important to remember is that when women have a deep understanding of their menstrual cycles and their body and their fertility, when they understand that it's an incredible part of a whole that serves a purpose, and when they understand even that their emotions and there's physical changes that they can experience and they may experience on a cyclical basis, that it helps us to understand ourselves and it helps us to appreciate and love ourselves. Even just the most basic level, that if you feel a little bit less energetic and more introverted as your period comes around, that's just part of a normal process. And as you have your period and your period stops and you enter into a new phase of the cycle, that will shift. Even just that basic understanding helps you to better understand yourself and to better understand your emotions and your cycles and to connect with the feminine. But beyond that, that very important aspect of it, understanding your cycles as a normal, natural, healthy part of being a woman, it also helps us to appreciate our bodies. Understanding that our period is a natural and normal part of this experience in a female body, it really does help us to appreciate and love the other parts of ourselves. And so when I think back to my own journey of discovering fertility awareness when I was quite young, through that process of discovering that my cycles were healthy and normal, that I didn't have to be afraid of my fertility, helped me to also develop a positive relationship with my body parts, with my vulva. Using a menstrual cup helped me to kind of overcome that concept of a lot of women aren't comfortable using menstrual cups because you have to actually touch your body and be in connection with it and start to understand. But through the process of fertility awareness, checking my cervix, using menstrual cups, it really just helped to connect me to recognize that this is my body. These are my body parts, and there's nothing wrong with how they look or feel or smell or anything like that. Just to have that basic understanding, like my body is perfectly okay and wonderful just the way that it is. And I know for some of you who are listening and are triggered by me using the word woman, I use the word woman when I talk about the experience of menstruation and periods, because the vast majority of individuals who have this experience are women. And I feel that it's important to say the word woman for all of the women who do identify as women. With that said, I do recognize that not every individual who experiences periods and a menstrual cycle identifies as a woman. But in either case, paying attention to your menstrual cycle and starting to really connect with it and track it and learn from it is just this incredible way to connect with the central part of ourselves that so many of us have felt disconnected from. And so I hope that this conversation between Maisie and I has encouraged you to continue to pursue that and to enjoy it and to celebrate it and to fly in the face of a healthcare system that tells us to suppress it and ignore it and tells us that it's not important and encourages us to suppress it without even the consideration that it could be an important part of our experience here as we go throughout our lives. So I just want to thank you for tuning in to the podcast today. I appreciate all of you for being part of the Fertility Friday community. I appreciate all of you for sharing the show, whether it's the podcast itself or specific episodes with your friends and anyone who you know would benefit from the episodes. So if you can think of a friend or someone in your life who would really benefit from hearing today's episode, again, the show notes page link you'll find at fertilityfriday.com/311. And with that said, I will let you go. I hope that you enjoy your week, your weekend. I hope that you are finding ways to stay connected to the world, whether that's going out for walks and enjoying nature or connecting with friends and family in whatever way you're able to do so. So I do hope that you are doing amazing. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.